The Ashkenaz Festival returns to locations across Toronto from August 30th to September 6th. Experience the best of the global Jewish music scene, including klezmer, Yiddish, Sephardic, Ladino, Persian, and so much more. Most programs free, from downtown to North York. Details at ashkenaz.ca.
To be honest, I'm happy that the Canadian government had the wherewithal to not sign on to a bad deal just for the sake of getting anything signed.
We just need some certainty and some stability.
I don't think Americans understand how this looks, right? Canadians that have been best friends to America, and now we're getting backstabbed. It just doesn't make any sense.
The voices of 3 Canadian Jewish farmers in 2 very different agricultural businesses, dairy and honey. But all have found themselves caught in the crosshairs of the Canada-US tariff war. The trade fight escalated last week after Canadian negotiators walked away from the table, saying the Americans were demanding too much and offering too little, including demands Ottawa said would infringe on Canadian sovereignty. Then, after the United States imposed an additional 50% tariff on roughly $28 billion worth of Canadian exports, Canada retaliated on Tuesday and matched the U.S. measures on a range of American imports. Milk and dairy products and natural honey are among the products affected. So what does the trade war look like from the farm? And how are these tariffs being felt by Canadian Jewish farmers? And do they think Canada was right to fight back? Well, in a word, yes. Everyone I spoke with said that even though their industries will suffer in the short term, Canada should not cave because protecting Canada's food supply matters. I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, August 26th, 2026. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News and made possible with the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. On today's episode, just weeks before Rosh Hashanah, we're looking at how the tariff war is hitting 2 Canadian Jewish producers of some high holiday staples, milk and honey. You'll hear from Montreal honey producer Yoav Sasportas a little later. He does export some of his honey to the United States. But first, we turn to one of Canada's long-standing Jewish dairy farming families, the Lowiths. They've farmed in the Hamilton area for nearly 80 years, since the patriarch Joe Lowith arrived in Canada in 1938 as a Jewish refugee from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia and learned to farm. Their milk and their dairy products stay in Canada, so they're insulated for now from the new U.S. tariffs on Canadian dairy. The system that helps protect Canada's dairy industry is called supply management. So why does Donald Trump object to it? And why did the Lowiths strongly support it? To explain, I'm joined now by Dave Lowith. He's the son of the farm's founder, and by Dave's nephew, Ben Lowith. They run a large dairy operation. They have about 500 Holstein milk cows at their Summit Home farm in Linden. They also bottle and sell some of their own milk and dairy products through their retail operation. Welcome, both of you, to the CJN's North Star podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us on.
Well, let's talk specifically, how does all this uncertainty and these tariffs impact your farms directly, your farm operations?
I think it's important to start with a little bit of background of how the Canadian dairy industry works before we can talk about how this would affect us. So the foundation of the Canadian dairy industry is that the farms are producing milk for the Canadian market. So we are not an exporting country in any meaningful way, that the amount of dairy milk that is produced in Ontario and in Canada in general matches the domestic demand for dairy products. And so there's a balance there that is maintained through the quota system that dairy farmers have. So it's all based on a balance. But that system can only survive if other countries are not using Canada as a dumping ground for their dairy products. And so what's happened historically in the United States is, because they don't have those controls on the supply, there is a constant oversupply of milk, and they need to look for export markets to take that oversupply. And Canada has been closed to that excess milk that the American system chronically produces.
But why does Donald Trump want so badly to get it in here when he says Canada's being unfair? Is that a fair statement on his side?
It's a fair statement that he wants to get it in here, mainly to appeal to that voting demographic that you have, dairy farmers and more dairy processors in the States that want to have access to that market for that excess product that their system is creating. To say that it's an unfair system is completely false. We're more of a self-contained system that we're not contributing to the oversupply in other countries, but at the same time we are limiting what other countries can dump into Canada.
Quite often they dump it in at a loss. They get a really boom and bust cycle where the prices of milk get short, and then the prices go up considerably to the farmer. So then they all start milking more cows to the point where they flood the market, and the price goes back down. And then that's when they want to start dumping milk into other countries.
I think if you asked 100 dairy farmers how the system should get changed in Canada, you would get 100 different answers. But if you asked 100 dairy farmers in Canada, should we abolish the system? I'd be shocked if you had one of them that said, yes, we should go to a free market system. The dairy industry in the States, it is a difficult industry to make a living at. The cows are producing milk every single day. You can't lay off a shift and say, we're going to cut down to 2 shifts a day instead of 3 shifts a day. And so ultimately, even if it's below your cost of production, if there's not some type of communal negotiation like we have in Ontario and in Canada, then you will end up taking whatever price is being offered by the processor.
And then when there's that oversupply situation, quite often you end up dumping milk actually down the drain, which does not happen in Canada. If we get a reduction in our quota, we lay off cows, but there is never a situation where farmers dump milk.
They go to the slaughterhouse or you sell them.
Yes, we really do produce for the market. You've never gone to a store and not been able to buy any dairy product you want. It's always been there. But supply management is nothing more than inventory control. You're just producing as much as you can sell. People don't make more widgets than they can sell. That's just good inventory management. And keeping in mind, there's over 7,000 dairy producers in Canada itself.
What would happen to your family business if the country got rid of supply management and allowed the Americans even more like we should say they do get some access. There are some loopholes. I mean, I've seen American cheese here, kosher cheese, for example, that comes.
Canada is already letting in about 18% of our domestic market is being filled or has access to foreign countries. But at some point, it can't be a death by 1,000 cuts. You can't give 1% here and 2% here and continue and still expect to have a dairy industry in Canada that is supplying the Canadian people. Eventually, it'll undermine the entire system. So the American dairy farmers that, you have a multi-billion-dollar farm bill that subsidizes farmers in the United States. So now if you want Canadian food sovereignty, now the Canadian government would have no choice but to match the government subsidies that these other countries are using to prop up their industries.
Some of the research has put up some questions about whether the American milk has things in it that would not meet Canadian consumer safety.
So I wouldn't go so far as to say that American milk is a significant quality difference from Canadian milk. They have quality standards. They are different from Canadian quality. With respect to hormones, BST, bovine somatotropin in the milk, while it is still legal to use in the United States and it has never been legal to use in Canada, my understanding is that most dairy processors in the United States will not accept milk from farms that are using BST.
I want to bring you back to before this weekend and previous free trade negotiations in 2018 or whenever it was, it pushed you, Ben, to start doing curds and your own yogurts through Summit Station and through your own farm, as opposed to before where you didn't do any of that.
Yeah. So family had some discussions around the table over, what we thought the next stage of our farm would be. We're very close to the city of Hamilton, and we all really liked the idea of being able to reach directly to the community and serve milk, our own dairy products directly to the Hamilton and Greater Hamilton community. So right now, as a dairy processor, we have a very small dairy processing facility, but we're not really vertically integrated because the milk from the farm still gets sold to the marketing board and then we buy it back. So even though the milk never actually leaves the farm, all farms have to sell to the marketing board, even if you are bottling your own milk. But part of our logic was that if anything did happen to the system, now we are a little more protected because now we do have our own processing facility and bottling facility.
And I should just add, at the present time, we're processing, somewhere in the neighborhood of less than 10% of our total milk production. The vast majority still goes through dairy farmers of Ontario and pooled with all the other milk in the province.
Do you think that the Canadian government's plan to slap retaliatory tariffs on September 8th on dairy is a good thing?
I think it's a necessary thing. I think the dairy farmers in general are of the opinion that we are all in this together, and there's going to be some pain felt by lots of industries. There's some industries that are going to get a haircut and some industries that are going to get decapitated. And so the challenge is so how do we support those industries that are really going to have a hard time with it, and at the same time put in measures that inflict the maximum amount of pain on select areas in the United States. So as much as I think that this is a necessary evil, it's an evil. Nobody wants this. Nobody's going to win with this situation. It's just a question of who can endure the most pain before clearer heads prevail.
I think the Wall Street Journal had an editorial today saying this is the dumbest trade war ever.
You don't even export to the United States, right? So you don't have that direct, but in sort of the bigger context, how would it impact, you think?
There'll be issues with some equipment coming in. Certainly there'll be some equipment coming from the States that people will put off buying, more access the used Canadian market as opposed to buying new equipment out of the States. Any country, when it comes to their own sovereignty, there's about 4 things that they should always be able to do themselves. Food, education, healthcare, and defense. If you want to have a sovereign nation, it's really dangerous to be reliant on another country for any of those 4 things. We produce food for the Canadian market, and we are insulated from the ups and downs of these type of trade disruptions.
Food sovereignty is really a big thing. You can go 3 or 4 days without buying a new car, but 3 or 4 days without food is a big deal.
So what about, Ben, is there anything that your contingency plans now?
Some of our containers, some of our, we make a chocolate milk, so you have cocoa, we make a coffee milk, so you have freeze-dried coffee powder. So we're kind of systematically looking at some of those inputs and saying, okay, where are they coming from? And do we want to order some product ahead of any potential tariffs that are coming in? So other than potentially stockpiling some inputs, we serve, we're pretty hyper local, and we're not blind to the fact that this, if it doesn't affect our business directly, it is absolutely going to affect the people in our community that use our business. Like I said, there's going to be people that are really going to get hurt by this, and the sooner that we can come to a resolution, absolutely the better, but not at the cost of the type of demands that were on the table for the last round.
If you're not importing stuff from the States or exporting stuff to the States in other industries, now your truck drivers are out of work. Those kind of things that ripple through at the secondary and tertiary level of the supplies.
Is there anything good that can come out of the attention that's being focused right now on food security and Canadian economic independence?
I think the Prime Minister said we're going to take on some major infrastructure projects that hopefully will employ some of the people that will get laid off in other industries, and keep the economy going, almost like the New Deal in the Depression sort of thing, to really start some big projects to keep our manufacturers going, keep our other industries going, and keep the labor force as employed as it can be. At the end of this, I think with proper management, we will come out stronger, more independent from only depending on the United States as our major exporter too, and reach out to other foreign markets as we expose ourselves or prove ourselves to be reliable, dependent suppliers, as opposed to just guessing what's going to happen next.
I'm wondering, when your grandfather, Ben, came to Canada in 1938 as one of the 39 refugees from Czechoslovakia being given away to the Nazis, he didn't even have a farming background. And then you became among the innovators in Canadian dairy. So when you think about what Canada represented to him, how does this current debate over Canada's agricultural sovereignty sit with you guys?
I think back to the kind of business that my grandparents ran, and there was a lot of integrity in the community. My father and my uncle, they rented land from neighbors to run the operation, and there wasn't a rental contract for 50 years. Nobody wrote up a contract. You just went and visited, and you came up with a deal, and you shook a hand, and that meant something. And that was just how business was done. And so I think my grandfather now would be very shocked and irate over trying to negotiate deals where you can't necessarily trust what that deal is, that there's changes at the last minute, that even when, it was said that sometimes these contracts are written in pencil. As a society, it is hard to even wrap your head around that that's where we're at, that it's one thing to negotiate hard. It's one thing to negotiate in the best interest of your people, but it's another entirely when you can't trust that those negotiations are going to be honored in the long run.
Very well said. You don't have a cow that's named Donald Trump, do you?
She's in my freezer.
It's pretty good. But I guess that's the anger that you feel, right? Because it's,
It really is. This has just turned everything upside down over the last 18 months to 24 months. Like the fact that you can't trust a world leader to honor commitments and to, follow through on what he says, whether you like it or not, just keep you guessing and off balance all the time. This is no diplomat. This is no world leader. This is no example for anybody, whether it's the kids in your country or other world leaders.
Well, I appreciate it, and you can invite me for steak dinner.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts.
Meanwhile, natural honey is also on the table. The United States buys more than half of Canada's total honey exports, especially from producers in the western provinces. So what does this mean for Canadian honey producers? What is natural honey, and what happens because it's coming just weeks before Jewish families are stocking up on honey for the Jewish New Year and the honey cakes? Joining me from Montreal is Yoav Sasportas. He founded Urban Devash, and he also runs a bee pollination company called Api Guru.
Thank you for having me on.
And thanks for taking time from your hives, from your harvest season. Is this busy season because it's the Jewish New Year, or it's always this time of year?
It coincides. It's our harvest period. So yeah, it is a hectic time for sure.
So I wonder, how many employees are there? How many bees do you have? And where are you located?
Yeah, we manage, if you count the number of bees, we have about 10 million bees that we manage. The population shifts throughout the year, and we have about 5-6 employees during our rush periods. About a quarter of our hives are in the city, and then we have them outside as well. But we're not designed for making the most amount of honey. For us, we care about the hive health and producing honey at the highest standard. The issue beekeepers are facing today is not just that these bees are getting harder to keep alive. And it seems like that every year we have to jump through more and more hoops. Yet the price of honey is stagnant, and it's not reflecting the increased cost in gas and treatments in maintenance. So beekeepers are already on a tight budget, and the ones that work with very narrow margins and work with big volumes and are reliant on the States for export, they're going to have to either change to retailing it in Canada or finding another export opportunity. This shakeup, so beekeepers are being used as a tool for negotiation, right? But really, our main role is to pollinate the crops. Honey is a nice added thing, but it's not the majority of the value beekeepers offer to society in the form of pollinating all the flowers. It's in the billions of value, right? So for a couple $1 million, that's not a huge deal in my opinion. And there's a lot of issues that are not related to the US. They're related to fake honey imports that are flooding our markets. If that was cut out, we could supply the Canadian market and the prices would be fair for everybody. And that's where my head is at on this whole tariff, because we're dealing with the same viruses as the US. We share a border. Our bees cross the border. There's a biosafety, issue also here. And the US is being hit with all types of fake honey too, and it's been a long time that we're asking for even the same definition. I listened to an interview today about this. There's not even a definition of honey that's throughout every place we trade with. So
tell me about this fake honey problem.
Someone who feeds their bees sugar syrup, and then sells that as honey. In Canada, that's not what we do. It's illegal, but people can go around it, do different things, or the honey can be cut later on. So someone who receives a barrel of honey might want to stretch it into 2 barrels, right? So they might cut it with something else, and it's been documented, know about it, but nothing gets done. So the whole industry is already in crisis. So adding this, it's just like, okay, this is another crisis, but it's not like the bees dying off. That's the major crisis, and the viability. How can beekeepers be incentivized to continue maintaining honeybees comfortably?
Export, right, to the United States.
Export. We do export.
Tell me your exposure.
We do export.
Problem.
Yeah, so we're exposed both ways. A lot of our packaging got hit with crazy tariffs, and some of that's charged from the Canadian government as well. Like we're paying, this is a tax on both ends. So it's not good. Like I was going to buy a honey extractor because I'm in extraction period. I was going to buy a honey extractor and I canceled my order because of the tariffs. It's not worth it for me, to buy from there. And it's from Poland. We're buying from elsewhere through the US. So I think that my approach has been to be cautious, not to expand. My apiary has even gone down in size because of this. But this is a long-term problem that needs to be resolved. There's biosecurity as well. Especially now we have a new mite called the layoffs. This is a mite that is in Europe now. It's in Ukraine. We're ordering queens from these countries. We're ordering bees from these countries, right? We're buying bees from Australia, New Zealand, Chile. These countries can have this parasite that enters into our chain. We might be better off closing our borders as well and saying we don't want to import. It's not like they're buying honey from us either. So the biohazard is there. We should cut off buying bees. And a lot of beekeepers would agree with that approach because we're bringing in stock with high risk.
So where are the Canadian beekeepers going to sell their honey and the producers? Is there going to be a glut in Canadian markets now of Canadian honey? And how will that impact you and pricing?
Yeah, I do natural beekeeping. So my bees I try to make them as self-sufficient as possible. So I'm less exposed to those things. As a result, I sell my honey at a higher price because we're raw, we're unfiltered, there's no sugar syrup, we don't produce large quantities. But the people that are exposed to that, that honey is going to be sold internally, and that's going to push prices down unless we find another export destination or if we ban imports. So if we ban any import honey, the Canadian beekeeper can survive. And I would say that buying a jar of honey from your local beekeeper, it doesn't have to be me, but supporting your local Canadian beekeeper is a vote, right? These are people that their life is on the line for the environment because this is not a replaceable thing. This is a local skill that's learned over generations. It's important that we recognize that this is the time to buy Canadian honey, buy Canadian products. This makes a big deal for the beekeepers and removes a lot of the uncertainty that's going on right now. And we should stop foreign imports so that the Canadian beekeepers can sell internally. Otherwise, it's a race to the bottom. It's a bad time to get hit with this because harvest just finished. There's honey to unload, right? And beekeepers are getting, they're getting undercut now. They're getting lowball offers, so and beekeepers might be forced to take that in order to do payroll and things like that. So it's serious. I know that there's some talks about Canadian government. I've heard that in the West, they started doing where they're putting money in the hands of the consumer to buy at farmers markets, at registered vendors. This is a brilliant idea that should be in Quebec, right? But, the people that are in the beekeeping, they love it. They do it because they love it and they're going to hang in there. So I'd say it's a good opportunity. Shut the borders. Whatever bees survive the winter, we develop a national plan of rebuilding our local stock so we only buy bees from ourselves, from Canadian beekeepers, and that's how we create a self-sufficient sustainable beekeeping system. And if it takes the tariff war to get it, it might be a blessing in disguise, right? It's been years of problems.
When you heard that they collapsed last Friday, the talks collapsed, and that Canada walked away, were you in support of that, Canada saying, I'm done?
Yeah, it's insane. There's no way we should settle. There's absolutely no way, right? This is our country, like I love Canada, and the farmers are conservative. They're conservative voters, right? I don't know about beekeepers. Beekeepers might be more on the other, but you can't concede on sovereignty. And the beekeepers, we're happy these questions are being raised, right? If it comes at that cost, it's a short-term pain. Some will go bankrupt, and there's already some that are on the verge of it or have. So there's government support coming, but you can't cave on that. It's not reasonable. And I don't think Americans understand how this looks, right? Canadians that have been best friends to America, and now we're getting backstabbed. It just doesn't make any sense. There's got to be, American voices that speak out about this, but I think it's just short term. And I think wait out Trump, wait till, more cooler heads can have this discussion.
The honey coming from Alberta and Manitoba that they can't sell it to sell, so they're going to ship it to Ontario and Quebec and try to, unload it here in Canada. That doesn't impact you at all, right? Because you're still only doing boutique local stuff, or does it impact you?
We work with institutions that are looking to have an environmental impact, a social impact. It's a different kind of thing, and they're willing to pay for that thing. But the people that are selling in bulk, yeah, it's going to be interesting what happens. But I think the Canadian beekeeper could supply Canada, as long as we get the other honeys that are on the market out of the way. That's unfortunately the sacrifice we're going to have to make. Canadian honey is superior. It's great honey, and I got approached from people selling in Saudi Arabia. There's a big demand for Canadian honey. So in Japan, but if they see that we're desperate, they might lowball. Yeah, it's short-term problems, but beekeepers will hold their honey because it never goes bad. They'll hold it for many years. They'll warehouse it until prices go up. It's been done before. It's not like an acceptable solution. We're not going to pay 50% tariffs. People that are heavily invested in exporting to the US are going to be in serious trouble. That's for sure. My message is vote for Canadian honey, vote for the Canadian beekeeper. That's how we fight back. Because at the end of the day, whether Trump was here or not, we should be buying local, right? This is not a political thing. This is the reality. We should buy food that's grown within our areas. It's the best. It's traceable. We know what's in it. So I wish everyone a Shana Tova and a Chag Sameach and a sweet New Year. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
The Ashkenaz Festival returns to locations across Toronto from August 30th to September 6th. Experience the best of the global Jewish music scene, including klezmer, Yiddish, Sephardic, Ladino, Persian, and so much more. Most programs free, from downtown to North York. Details at ashkenaz.ca.